Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter,
business columnist and editor Greg Jefferson,
investigative reporter Brian Chasnoff.
And it's our first podcast in a couple of weeks. We took a break for Thanksgiving week. And now that we've had a little time to kind of get over the November election, it's a little early, but I think it's we're on the verge of starting to have some news on city council races. I think we're going to start having some people announcing over the next few weeks. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what we can expect. We've got two city council members who are term limited out, Rebecca Villagran in District 3 and Shirley Gonzalez in District 5. My sense is that we're going to have I don't know about District 3, but in District 5, we're probably going to have a tremendous number of candidates there. I mean, I'm hearing people talking about maybe like 10 candidates running there. But the rest of the other council members, including Mayor Ron Nirenberg, are able to run again. Josh, I wanted to get a chance to talk to you a little bit about what you're hearing at this point. I mean, there's still a lot that we don't know, but what are you hearing? Any surprises out there that people should look for?
Well, I think what we're, so far what we're seeing in terms of the folks who have filed, I mean, we're starting to see some interesting names pop up. A lot of interest in Council District 2. Mm-hmm. A number of folks have already filed to challenge Jada Andrews Sullivan. Among them, Farrell Clark, the Black Lives Matter activist. He was involved in protests over the summer. So I expect that to be a fairly interesting race. Another interesting note there is a former staffer of Jada Andrews Sullivan, Jalen McKee Rodriguez, has also filed to run against her. He's a bit of a younger guy. Then in Council District 1, the local environmental activist, former county commissioner candidate Mario Bravo has filed to run against District 1 Councilman Roberto Trevino. So I expect that to be an interesting race. I'm very interested to see what goes on, obviously, in the mayor's race. We're going to see whether or not you see a lot of folks kind of line up to challenge him. We're still waiting to see whether Greg Brockhouse is going to throw his hat into the ring for a rematch. And I think depending on basically this is going to be a referendum on how both the mayor and the city council have performed during the pandemic and the ensuing economic crisis. So I expect it to be sort of a referendum on that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned District 1 and Roberto Trevino, the challenge that he's could be facing. And I wanted to ask, because this is a rumor that's been floating around for a while, and I don't know where things stand. I think a lot of people are unsure about this, but there's been a rumor for a while that Roberto Trevino was eyeing a mayoral run. He has had some pretty public conflicts with Mayor Nirenberg in 2019 over bike lanes, for example. He was an opponent of the workforce development initiative that was really was the big focus of Mayor Nirenberg over the past few months. Any sense about where he's leaning on that, or what his plans are?
So I feel like this has gone back and forth within this past term. He's thinking about it. He's not thinking about it. People have asked him. People have not asked him. It's like it's kind of all over the place. I do think it would be interesting for him to run and basically on the the anti-workforce platform. Basically, given that garnered more than 3/4 of the vote, I think that would be something he would have to maybe reckon with to some degree. Something that was sort of overwhelmingly popular and sort of bore the mayor's face on it. Yeah. But the other thing that's you keep in mind here, he's got another term. At some point, he's been on there since 2015, it was thought for a second that he was term limited out. That might have actually been my fault. That some people might have thought.
Well, because he got an appointment to replace Diego Bernal, so he kind of came.
Yeah, and and so there was enough time in the term. So he's actually got another council term. So like, does he go now? Does he wait until he's term limited out? I guess we'll see.
Yeah, everyone around Greg Brockhouse that I've talked to recently is convinced that Greg Brockhouse will run again. And Greg, I was curious about your thoughts because as we've talked about on the podcast, I mean, a couple of things that Greg Brockhouse talked about in the final weeks leading up to the election were his vehement opposition to workforce development and probably even more so the VIA public transit initiative, and they both passed, by overwhelming margins.
Really
so,
well.
I mean, does that affect? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
What's your sense of it?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he doesn't really have much. As far as those two initiatives, he really doesn't have much room to maneuver in. I mean, they both did really well at the polls on November 3rd. A lot of it is probably if he runs. I would expect him to focus on kind of his tried and true themes with Ron Nirenberg, kind of an overall lack of leadership, unwillingness to work with council members. I mean, I think that's less true now than it was 2 years ago. Yeah. But I've heard in the last couple of months, he's kind of sounded those two themes. So, if he runs, I would expect more of that. It's going to be hard to campaign against, the workforce development program. It's, for one thing, it's not really going to get started until next fall. So I'm not sure, it's not a hard target for him.
That's right. I'm curious.
And again, it did so well at the polls. It was more than 75%. It was like 76% of the vote. So yeah, I mean, I'm just not sure what his argument is going to be.
Have you guys? I was going to ask y'all if you've heard rising frustration with Nirenberg in the face of these these curfews and so forth, because. I just kind of have this ambient sense that people are getting frustrated and they're taking it out on so-called authorities who, declare that they can't do this and that, because people are so sick of COVID at this point.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because, the things that Brockhouse ran on 2 years ago, I mean, stuff like Chick-fil-A and not, and San Antonio not vying for the Republican National Convention. I mean, the political statute of limitations on that has pretty much run out. But I think there may be a lane for him to sort of talk about, the local government being too restrictive and infringing on people's liberties. I don't know that that's gonna win you an election in a city that's really pretty blue politically. I mean, we saw, Joe Biden won Bexar County by almost 20% just last month or a few weeks ago. So I don't know that's a formula for winning, but it might be a lane that he could run in.
Yeah, there's also, we haven't mentioned this yet, but I mean, there could be kind of an overlying theme in the mayor's race and also in the council races, and that is if this group of environmental activists succeed in getting the Recall CPS initiative on the ballot in May. So basically, what that would do is hand control of the governance of CPS Energy from their board of trustees, which is the self-perpetuating board, to city council. Mm-hmm. And I think you can expect Nirenberg to fight that. So I mean, the question is, is that an opening for Brockhouse to kind of would he be willing to to fight that one, to side with the environmentalists? And I definitely think that's, that may be part of the motivation for Mario Bravo running in District 1, just, apart from his own political ambitions. I'm sure he wants to talk about, Recall CPS and that initiative.
Yeah. Well, Brian, you talked about, the COVID restrictions, and I want to talk a little bit about what we've just seen recently. I mean, as with many other communities across the country, the infection rates have really spiked recently. I think over the past week, we've averaged nearly like 800 new reported cases a day. We're above 80,000 in the San Antonio area since March. And last week, just before Thanksgiving, Mayor Nirenberg and County Judge Nelson Wolff initiated a curfew that basically ran from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. Over Josh, it was about 4 days. Is that right? From like
right,
like Thursday
from Thursday to Sunday, basically this morning. And over that time, they only, according to the most recent city records that were released at about 9 a.m. So right in time for this podcast. The only citation that they had issued over the weekend was only maybe tangentially related to the curfew. So they didn't really cite anybody for violating the curfew, or any businesses for violating the curfew.
You did have protests in front of the Alamo. You had some local activists. You had some I think some business leaders complaining. I think there was someone who had a sports bar who was upset because Saturday night you had the Mike Tyson Roy Jones Jr. fight, and ordinarily it might be a situation where you'd have some good business on that night, and with a 10 p.m. curfew that didn't happen. So, I guess what I'm wondering about, and we talked about a little about it a few minutes ago, is just what kind of pushback the mayor is going to get on this, and whether just people are at a point where they're where they're just kind of fed up with these restrictions in general.
Well, I think he's certainly testing their patience. You had a number of sort of restaurant owners take to Twitter on Wednesday, when this was announced. The most notable one for me was Chad Carey, tweeting from the Monterey account, basically like, we'll do this, but like, could you like give us more notice than this? Yeah. And I think that there's probably that's probably like if that maybe not be the moderate tone on it, but I mean, like you can sense from sort of that and the folks who are out over the weekend protesting, that there is sort of like this mounting frustration with these kind of restrictions, and a lot of this on the backs of folks who have already sort of been hit hardest,
sure,
by the pandemic. The restaurant industry, the bars. They've had to this year deal with shutdown, then reopening, then restrictions again, then reopening. And at the same time, also having to abide by sort of guidelines at the local level and the state level.
Yep. And it's happening at a time when there's, with the possibility of another round of COVID relief from the federal government has been held up in Congress. And so, that is also, has been a concern. You wrote about the fact that part of what the city is doing, and I guess this is really about the only other thing they can do at this point, is that they've stepped up enforcement when it comes to the restrictions they have, as a way of trying to make sure that people are socially distancing and complying with things. What steps have they taken to make sure that these things are being enforced?
Well, they added the code enforcement division that's sort of handling this, has added something like, I want to say it's 10 officers to dealing with this. That's basically what the mayor said last week, was that this was going to be able to double the number of proactive inspections that they do on businesses, ones that aren't generated by people calling and complaining. And I noticed a number of those in the in sort of the data that was released today. In terms of the number of inspections that they're doing. So they're stepping that up. They also, They also shut down the strip club on the northeast side, the XTC Cabaret.
Yeah,
that was kind of flagrantly violating the emergency orders.
they had like 6 violations or something like that.
Yeah, they had 6 violations, but they've only taken that measure, a handful of times. There are only 2 other times that they've done that to a business where they've just said you're violating this way too often and you don't appear to be listening to us, so we're just gonna shut you down. But other than that, and I suppose the curfew, they really don't have any other tools in their toolbox.
Yeah.
Part of that is, a good chunk of that obviously is because the governor has basically assumed responsibility for deciding what would be open, to what degree in terms of capacity. So, those are basically the 2 tools in their toolbox they can use.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit about President Trump and how our local Republican lawmakers have responded to his complaints about the presidential election. But first, we're going to take a short break.
Head over to expressnews.com to check out our all-new podcast page where you can find more great San Antonio-focused podcasts such as Express Briefing, where we bring you the top headlines for the day in about 10 minutes or less.
Okay, we're back. And Brian, you had a story, I think just before Thanksgiving, where you talked to some Republican lawmakers, or attempted to reach out to some Republican lawmakers, and with the context being that we're now nearly a month past the presidential election, and President Trump not only has refused to concede, but is continuing to claim that the election was stolen from him. Joe Biden won the popular vote by more than 6 million votes and counting. He won 306 electoral votes, which is the same number Donald Trump won in 2016 when he claimed a landslide. But President Trump has claimed that the election was stolen from him, and he's been fighting all these legal battles, and which have failed. The various arguments that he has made and that his lawyers have made have pretty much all been shot down. That includes the fact that they've alleged that their poll watchers were not allowed in, at election centers, which was not true. They've claimed that thousands and thousands of dead people voted. That has been looked into and debunked. They have just raised all kinds of arguments about, fraud in various states. I think they allege that in Detroit, you had more people voting than were registered to vote, which was not anywhere close to being true. And what's often happened with these cases in various states has been that they have alleged fraud publicly, the lawyers or President Trump, but then when they get in the courtroom and they have to address a judge, they've kind of backed away from that and said, no, well, we're just looking at human error and that kind of thing. But to put
when they have to tell the truth, actually.
When there's actually some kind of obligation to be honest, which is that pesky obligation. But, just to kind of put in perspective, the election of 2016 was basically decided by 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, that President Trump won by, I think if you combine the numbers there, I think it was about 78,000 votes, something like that. For him to flip this election, he would have to flip 3 states, which are Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona, and he would have to basically flip 105,000 votes. So to be able to do that in 3 states, this was pretty much an impossible legal fight to begin with, and they never were really able to prove fraud. And so this is my long-winded way of kind of prefacing the question I had for you, Brian. It would seem a natural thing. It's an obvious thing that this election was basically conducted smoothly with the normal human error and some technical glitches that you're going to have when 150 some million people vote in more than 3,100 counties across the country. But Republicans, for the most part, have been really unwilling to come out and say that. And so you reached out to members of Congress and in one case Tony Gonzalez, who has been elected to Congress, as well as state lawmakers. What did you find when you talked to them or tried to talk to them?
Right. So my goal was to try to talk to everyone who won in this past cycle, all the Republicans who won, on the ballot here in Bexar County. And none of them wanted to talk about Trump's claims, which at that point I thought were pretty pathological. And of course Trump is still on this, insisting on widespread fraud. But this story, which ran a couple weekends ago, I think, I reached out I got a couple people on the phone. I got U.S. Rep Chip Roy, who his district, of course, stretches from here to Austin. But he didn't want to talk about it. The only reason he picked up the phone was he thought I was someone else. And he told me to reach out to his communications team. He had to go.
And he said, he said like, I've got a role or something like that.
I've got a role. Yeah. I didn't talk to, but I tried to reach Trish DeBerry, who of course ran as a Republican and won as a Republican, on commissioner's court. I reached out to Tony Gonzalez, who declined to comment. Gonzalez, who defeated his Democratic opponent in Congressional District 23. State Rep Steve Allison didn't call me back. State Rep Lyle Larson didn't call me back. Luckily, Senator John Cornyn, who won this past cycle, he had a scheduled call with reporters on the day that I was trying to put the story together. And of course, this was the only question that any reporter wanted to know on this call was, did he consider Joe Biden the president-elect? And I thought it was interesting that, Cornyn spent the first 5-10 minutes of the call touting his own victory in the race. And then when Biden came up, he refused to acknowledge that Biden was president-elect. He said he's not president-elect until the votes are certified.
Yeah, this has been really a major annoyance for me just in observing this election. When you've had when all the media outlets called the election for Joe Biden, you had a Republican response, which was the media doesn't get to decide, and it was basically exploiting the fact that a lot of people in this country, don't dislike the press. So they're saying the media doesn't get to decide. But as we all know, and John Cornyn was one of these people, Republicans immediately declared Donald Trump president-elect in 2016, the day after the election, when all the news outlets called the race for Donald Trump. Those results had not yet been certified at all, but they were calling him president-elect because it had been called.
Yeah. It's also interesting that one of the arguments that I've heard from the right is that the Democrats didn't accept Trump's victory, and I think what they're referring to is the resistance. Folks who just you saw this movement spring up very quickly after Trump won. But I think that's kind of apples and oranges, because for one thing, Hillary Clinton did concede,
right, and
Obama graciously allowed the transition to move forward. So it doesn't seem like that's a really apt comparison.
Yeah, Obama actually had Trump at the White House 2 days after the election, and Trump himself, in his inaugural address, thanked the Obamas for all their help and said they had been, the word he used was magnificent, in helping the transition. Joe Biden who was then vice president, had Mike Pence over during that period. Michelle Obama invited Melania Trump. So as you're saying, it's apples and oranges. There were protests in the streets after Trump's victory, or people who were angry about the results, but there was not a movement to claim fraud or to have the results thrown out. I think Tony Gonzalez met with the editorial board this past week, and he, I think, tried to justify Trump's behavior by saying that, Al Gore challenged the results in 2000. Of course, that was an election in which the election came down to a few hundred votes in one state, Florida, and there were perceived irregularities. And there actually were irregularities in the sense that thousands of people voted for Pat Buchanan by mistake because they were confused by a particular ballot. And Pat Buchanan himself later said those were really Al Gore's votes, but there wasn't fraud, but there were irregularities.
And let's not elide the fact that, after it became clear to Trump that his legal battles were falling flat, he took up an influence campaign where he was pressuring these low-level bureaucrats on these canvas boards in Michigan, for example, and trying to convince state lawmakers to overturn the will of the voters. It was extremely corrosive. It's been extremely corrosive and disturbing to a lot of people what the president.
Yeah, but I mean, at least you saw. I mean, with the Georgia Secretary of State, with the vote certification officials in Michigan. I mean, they actually withstood the pressure, and I think that's admirable. Right. I think that was, it's like there, that it was nice to see some integrity come out of this, and it's too bad that you didn't see it at the upper levels of the party. You see it down below at the state and local level. Officials actually doing their duty. I thought that was a really heartening thing to see. I think
one thing that strikes me, and I think should not go unmentioned, is particularly in Bexar County, all these Republicans who are not wanting to talk to you, Brian, and are not or who are hedging on this. They have won their races, and they appeared to have garnered, to have outperformed Trump in Bexar County. I mean, you look at Cornyn, he's got about 11,000 more votes than Trump did. You have Steve Allison outperformed Trump in his district.
Yeah, but Josh, you're forgetting.
But I mean, what you're seeing is kind of like the fear that Trump is going to be an influencer, going forward.
Right. I was going to say that the ghost of Hugo Chavez only flipped Trump's votes. So,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and the thing is that people have wondered, well, why would Republicans be afraid of Trump? He's clearly on his way out of office. His political future is pretty uncertain, but he still is a public force. He has the loyal support of Fox News, or at least the primetime hosts on Fox News, and so a lot of the base is really loyal to him, and they turn on Republican elected officials who cross him. So I think that there's just a fear, not necessarily of Trump himself, but just the sort of infrastructure that's been built around the Republican Party that tends to support him, and if you cross him, you kind of get identified as a rhino, and that brings me to the point that the one local Republican that I'm aware of who has spoken out on this issue against what Trump has done is Will Hurd, and because he doesn't have to run again, he decided not to seek another term, and I think he got identified, fairly or not, by a lot of Republicans in Texas as a rhino because he disagreed with Donald Trump and was public about it on some issues, and so he had less to lose all the way around on this, and so I think that's he came out like the day after the election and said, this is, questioning the validity of the election process is.
And in my story, I did reach Kevin Wolf, who spoke to me very candidly, because obviously he did not run for re-election, and so he's, he doesn't have anything to lose. And, he was in Kevin Wolf's usual way, he was pretty blunt. He said, this is one of two things, or a combination of both. It's number one is Trump's being a sore loser, and number two, he's scared of criminal prosecution after he leaves office. So,
right. Yep. I think that's very true. I mean, the one positive has been, aside from the fact that, some Republicans at the state levels and local levels have stepped up in, as you mentioned, Greg, with Georgia, the Secretary of State there. Aside from that, I think the one positive is that the General Services Administration, a week ago, did decide to finally sort of allow Biden access to resources of the federal government, and so the transition has moved forward. But you still have a president basically saying the election was a sham, and I don't think that's going to change at any point. But So we're going to wrap things up there, and hope everybody's doing well. Hope you all had a good Thanksgiving, and we'll be back next week. Take care.